Good morning and welcome to the Business Brunch. I'm Stephen Spencer and I'm joined by my colleagues Wendy Ball, Head of Events, Catering and Corporate Relations at the Ashmolean Museum, and the man who could be said to have imbued the Ashmolean with an even more powerful spirit, Tagore Ramoutar, co-founder of the Oxford Artisan Distillery, maker of the Ashmolean gin, and now also an advisor to SMEs and high-growth startups. Morning, both.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
So we're here to talk about a big question affecting thousands of businesses in the hospitality, tourism and retail sectors, and that's around their visitors and customers. We know when they can come back into our venues, hopefully, all being well, but do we know how they will feel? And do we know how to prepare to give them an experience that will not only make them feel safe, but also deliver real value so that they'll want to come back again? And we start to build back to a sustainable business model. So to help us understand the context, we're going to have a pre-record from John Young, Travel and Culture Director at BVA BDRC, who've been running acclaimed consumer sentiment surveys throughout the pandemic. But first, Wendy, the Ashmolean is one of Oxford's most prestigious cultural attractions and also hospitality and events venues. We know in general terms how the pandemic has impacted venues like yours, but how do you think your visitors and clients have changed in the past year?
Thanks, Stephen. A really good question. I suppose the simple answer is they haven't changed. They're still the same people, but their feelings and sentiments have changed.
Oh.
We've become quite adept now at closing and opening and closing and opening again. So we know we can do so safely. And I think last summer, with the advent of good to go, so that we could, safely return people back to venues and visitor attractions that they knew to be safe and that they knew they were being well looked after, was really important. The question around how people have changed, I think people have been a lot more cautious about what they choose to go and visit. I think one of the other things that I would probably advocate is that people also want to make a real event of it. They want to make a real experience of it. So if you are going to have to go to the trouble to get online and fill in all your details and the details of the group that you're traveling with, and that you're going to have to think about what type of transport you're going to use to get somewhere, and that you're actually then going to have to think about how you're going to eat and drink and what facilities might be available, you're just going to be a little bit more planned. And so your expectation around that is going to be greater.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about, isn't it? And Tagore, the Oxford Artisan Distillery runs very popular distillery tours. I know from my work with Experience Oxfordshire that walking tours market's been impacted by everything from lack of tourists to social distancing rules. As you look forward to recommencing your tours, how do you think they'll be received by your early visitors?
Well, I think Wendy pointed out for Ashmolean, a lot had happened last year with closing and opening, and it gives us a bit of an indication of what will happen for us opening again. So last summer, we opened with quite a renewed, different offering to try and get people in. And we got, I'd consider sort of two groups, people who had booked with us before, who were desperate to come out. And then we got, for tours, what I'd call risk takers, people who thought they were not invulnerable, but they'd take the risk. Interestingly enough, the people who used the outside bar were actually almost the opposite. They were the cautious people who wanted to visit people and felt that because it was such a big outdoor space, they actually felt safer. And I think this gives an indication of what will happen as we reopen again. So we're opening on the 21st of May. And again, I think we'll have the people who want to go out, re-experience life and do something. But I think the predominant difference is that there'll be more local people. The pandemic has had a reconnection with local brands. And I think people with staycations and staying local, I think initially we'll have a lot more local people. And we'll also this time have a little bit older. So in the summer, we had a slight dropping in the average age as younger people came out and older people still sheltered. This time, with the over 50s being essentially all vaccinated by then, I think it'll open up to some of the older groups. So we'll have what I'd call the less cautious groups joining us as well.
Well, let's get some context on that from John Young. As I mentioned, BVA BDRC have been tracking consumer sentiment since the pandemic first hit us. And we're delighted to have this overview of where we are now from John Young.
Hello, thank you all very much for having me today. Over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of some of the highlights of our reporting from our UK sentiment tracker. It's called ClearSight. It's on our website, and you can download our latest sentiment report and a load more for free. But I'm just going to give you some highlights. So the first highlight is that the nation is more optimistic about the future now than it has been at any point in the last 12 months. So 46% of the population think the worst has passed, and that is far higher than at any point during the pandemic. I think the second highest was back in April last year, when 33% thought the worst had passed. Second highlight of the report, despite this optimism, on average, the population don't expect some level of normality to return for another 10 months, so not until the very end of the year. So this really highlights that the UK public are sort of bedding in, they're anticipating restrictions for all of 2021, and they're also probably going to moderate their behaviour as a result. One thing we've been measuring since October is people's comfort levels with conducting activities, and we've measured this across a range of different sectors. We've looked at the hospitality, we've looked at attractions, we've looked at retail, and that's all in our report. If I had to pull out one key point that summarises all of the comfort ratings across all sectors, it's broadly that activities in enclosed spaces, so let's say indoors, or activities that have a number of physical touch points and that involve spending time in close proximity to other people, tend to have the lowest comfort levels. Now, this is all very intuitive, but I think it's a very useful reminder if you fall into those categories. So, for example, in the accommodation sector, hotels have quite a large comfort gap, current comfort levels against comfort levels before the pandemic. But in contrast, a private home or self-catering accommodation, they have much higher comfort levels and a much smaller comfort gap. So people are looking as much as possible to avoid contact with other people. When we look at attractions, so pretty much all indoor attractions have quite a large comfort gap Outdoor attractions, less so, particularly gardens or country parks. So the comfort gap with gardens or country parks is only 8, which means that people are almost as comfortable going to them now as they were before the pandemic. This is less the case for zoos and theme parks, although they tend to be mostly outdoors. They do involve a lot of physical touching and being close to other people. But that said, zoos and theme parks comfort levels are higher than, say, your museums or galleries. When we look at other activities, so cinemas, pubs, clubs, gyms, comfort levels are still fairly low. This is less the case with restaurants, which is quite interesting. You know, you're surrounded by people. They are enclosed spaces, but I think, you know, the restaurants had a real chance to prove themselves last year, certainly in August, and people just feel a little more comfortable, although still the gap is quite large. Shopping malls and centres, the comfort gap also smaller, again, perhaps illogical, given how much how close we are to people and how much we're touching things. But people clearly have been doing that throughout the pandemic, so feel a little more comfortable. In terms of how we look at the population, so we segment them by 6 segments. We based on how COVID cautious or COVID confident they are. So we have cautious but content, who are really, really cautious. And on the other side of the scale, life goes on and less to lose, and protective but pragmatic. Now, those 3, slightly different in terms of demographics, but each far more likely to engage in all of the sectors I've just mentioned than any other segments. So we would recommend that if you are looking to target your marketing, and communications to focus on those 3 segments. Now, what's really interesting for these segments is that they are interested all in experiences. So they do not just want safety and low case numbers, although obviously that is important. For them to visit you, they will want a guaranteed experience. They want to escape COVID. They want to return to having immersive emotional experiences. There's far more on our website about these segments, so please do log on, take a look, and obviously please get in touch if you want to know more. Thank you.
So there was some really great data there, wasn't there, which I'm sure reflects a lot of the thinking and planning that you're doing. Wendy, what do you think are the most important things the Ashmolean can do to tap into the sentiment and the segments that we've seen there in a positive way?
No, absolutely. I think one of the key things that John talked about that we have touched on already was that people need to feel safe. And I think, last summer, as he mentioned, particularly restaurants and places of interest, people really trust that we do it safely, that we are following the right guidelines, that we have strict policies in place, that we train our staff well, and that we really listen to what visitors want and how they're feeling. And I think that, once again, as we said last summer, but the same thing still applies, our front end teams are really, really key to absolutely getting this right and really welcoming people back.
And how do you think that sentiment might change over the rest of the year? We know how people are thinking the rest of the year might pan out, but what do you think? Do you think we get one chance to get it right, for example?
I think probably one chance to get it right is a tricky one to answer, because people's experiences are very different. But I think as long as we try and strive to get back to that fullest possible experience, so that people can come out and really enjoy themselves thoroughly and make take the opportunity to really get together again with people that they really trust. Because I'm sensing from that sentiment research that once again we're seeing that people are really happy to meet with their own family, their own friends, people they really trust, and go to places they really trust. And so I think that's going to be the important thing, is people are going to be much happier doing that to start with, and just cautiously stepping back in.
And what about the tours market, Tagore? Obviously talking smaller groups, COVID measures in place, touring an industrial site. How do you address all those issues we've heard about from John?
I think, again, last year was great because we actually had a chance to do things once and see what worked. I'd actually like to also touch on a bit of when he said, I think we've only got one chance not to get it wrong. So I think that whole safety of going with people that you know and with groups that you know is key. I don't think people want to do things with strangers so much. Our tours have gone down from 20 that used to be before this crisis down to 6, and then we build it up to 8. And we've redesigned even where we do them, so they're now in quite an airy part of an 18th century barn. There's a very nice fresh wind blowing through that keeps it nice and fresh, and everyone's over 2 meters away. When they circulate around the site, they have to wear masks. But I think the key bit is that people feel safe. When they come out, they need to say that that was the safest environment they could possibly imagine and still enjoyed themselves. An awful lot will happen due to word of mouth. And so I think it's not just about being safe, and it's safe for consumers and for your team. It's also about the perception on the people receiving it that they were safe. So it's more than just following the guidelines. It's going that little bit extra to show how special that experience was, and yet you still care about them enjoying themselves. There was quite a lot of things happened this year where it sounded like people cared more about being safe than the person actually enjoying the experience. You got quite a lot of TV shows where they spent 20 minutes telling you they followed the guidelines. Consumers don't want to know that you're following the guidelines. They expect it. What they want is that they feel safe following those guidelines, and they still enjoy themselves. So I think the key is that you can do it seamlessly. They still can enjoy an experience, but without feeling like it's been a punishment.
I always remember surprising a lot of groups that I've worked with by asking them what is Disney's #1 value. And they always say it's things like, fun and entertainment, it's safety. And for visitor attractions and venues, safety's always been the number one priority, hasn't it? It's just, this has suddenly thrown it into sharp relief. And now we have to make sure that's a given, but it's clearly a given, so that people can relax into the experience that they've come for and that they're paying for. Do you think there will be changes, or can you see changes in the tours model, Tagore, as a result of all of this? Perhaps more blended experience, more upsells, add-ons?
So, firstly, we actually changed the flow around the distillery totally. So it now is a very different flow. There's certain elements we have to not do because they're actually small spaces that can't be covered. We've also changed how you do tastings. So before there were a very social events standing around at the bar, they're now done at tables much earlier in the system. And we do, rather than 20 people, we do on 3 tours, we might do 5 tours of 6 or 8 people. So they're a much more intimate affair now in many ways. I think we've also, during lockdown, done virtual tours. And I think that the future is very much a blended environment between social engagement, virtual online stuff, and reality, real events. And so I think we'll touch our consumers in all 3 ways, and we'll continue doing that blend. But it will become more and more tailored. And it's really about utilizing more the open space. So before it was very much about, real distilling and that connection with what the distillers did. Now it's very much more about the experience of visiting, the tastes, and that feeling of going away thinking that was really enjoyable, and transitioning to the outdoor space. So we have a large outdoor space, so experience will be very much different than it was before lockdown, when people came on tours, didn't necessarily stay, and now they'll book, stay longer. They'll stay at the one place they feel safe and they're allowed to stay longer with, which is a different experience. And I've talked to quite a few other people running distilleries, and they too are changing their experience to be more like that.
So do you think it's, sort of less emphasis on education and telling you how we do something, and more on almost like a spiritual experience, something life enhancing?
I've always thought spirits were spiritually enhancing, so this is
straight into that one.
Yeah, I could always say that it makes me smile. I think people are looking for something they can do safely, that they can do. They're not going to travel that far because they're still not going to be allowed to, probably. That they can do multiple times and enjoy in different ways. So it could be sitting outside, having a tour, inviting other friends and sitting outside afterwards, etc. And I think that experience that people can feel pleased about and talk about, I think people are going to talk a lot more about what they do, because we're almost like it's a fresh, clean slate. People are doing something for the first time. It's a bit like, when there's been bad weather, everyone talks about it. Going out now is going to be such a difference, such a surprise. People are going to talk about, I did that and it was real fun and I felt safe. So I think the early days experience is going to be incredibly different. And I think the enthusiasm people have for just being there is going to be different. The fact that they've purposely booked in with you, because everyone has to now book in with something, means that they're already engaged and feeling positive. And they're going to go away being stronger advocates of whatever, be it the Ashmolean, be it ourselves. They're going to be much stronger advocates of what they've experienced. So when I said before, you've got one chance not to get it wrong, I do believe that, because when they go away, they're going to tell 10 friends.
Yeah.
And like usually when they say 10 friends that are bad, they're going to say, I went there, it was safe, I could enjoy it, and I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Okay,
and I think
go on, Wendy, go on.
If I may, I think the other thing that we found, and I think it's important to share, is that we have had an opportunity now to have lived with a pandemic for a year, and we have really listened to what it is that visitors want. And so we've got the benefit now of, when we reopen, 17th May for us, when we reopen our pre-Raphaelite exhibition that's going to open to much fanfare, it's been designed with COVID in mind. So essentially, there is plenty of space. we're always very lucky in the galleries that we've got lots of space and lots of air and light anyway, but it's designed with space so that people can really enjoy the experience, go slow, have a fantastic time. And then you mentioned upsells earlier, Tagore's mentioned the additional experiences. Go and have an afternoon tea, enjoy the terrace, enjoy the skyline, have a gin and tonic. Why not?
100%. So let's sum up. We've heard from John that on the whole, there's a demand to come back to venues. And of course, within that, there's different groups at different stages of readiness and expectation. In our work at Stephen Spencer and Associates, we always start with the brand proposition and how it relates to the customer. And we ask, is this relevant? And is it relevant now? Wendy, what do you think are the biggest issues for your venue to remain relevant and deliver what your customers need now?
Well, I think I touched on it earlier. It's all about listening. And we have got that wealth of information coming now, not just from the person to person when people come to visit us, but also from the digital interactions that we're getting. We get an awful lot more feedback from a lot of the digital collection sharing we've done, a lot of the podcasts that we're sharing, and a lot of feedback that we're able to get through the use of new media. So listening is what it's all about, understanding what it is that people come to us for, what they expect to find when they get to us, and making sure we deliver that with a huge, great big smile and a great big sense of memory.
Fantastic. And Tagore, would you add anything to that?
Well, I think this year is going to be characterised by prolonged social distancing, and I think consumers will pivot between virtual and in-person services. I think there'll be a strong preference that will continue for locally sourced products and an increase in trying to consume things that have similar values to what you aspire to. I think local consumers will be looking for safe events, treats, and experiences that allow them to do things again. And I think, from my perspective, that plays to our strengths. A distillery tour is a fun thing to do, and it is by its nature local if you live locally to it. But I do think they're the things that are going to happen. I think it's not going to bounce back as quick, but people are going to seek as much normality as possible.
Well, it's a hugely important role that venues such as yours play, isn't it, in sort of helping people back into real life outside of their four walls, life where they can get to appreciate other influences, other learnings, other experiences. So I mean, it's a hugely important role, and that's why obviously there's been so much of a focus on the sector and obviously some frustrations around reopening, but at least we do now have a roadmap to reopening. So our time is nearly up. I think it's been hugely interesting, and thank you both so much for your insights. Just remind us again when you're opening up, Wendy.
So for us, it's the 17th of May.
For us, we'll be opening the bar on the 16th of April with the shop and the bar opening, and then providing that everything goes well, we'll be open tours on the 21st of May.
Any statement that starts with "we're opening the bar" has got to be good, hasn't it? So I'm sure we can't wait to visit both of your venues and the many other wonderful venues we have in Oxfordshire. So thanks also to John Young, and do visit the BVA BDRC website and sign up for their free updates on the consumer mood as it changes. And so it only remains to thank B4 for hosting. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you again very soon.